There we go, recording in progress. So welcome everybody, Toolbox Tuesday, and today we're going to talk about our own white labeled solution called PayVault. My special guest is Jathan Bennett. Let's get this kicked off, and I promise you it will not be death by PowerPoint today. We're just going to get through a couple of slides, present some information off to you, and then I'm going to hand over the reins to Jathan, who's going to give you a live walkthrough, and that'll be a great opportunity for all of you to ask your questions. So let's just jump over and get this kicked off. Now, we're talking about a VT environment. So what exactly is PayVault? All right, as I mentioned previously, it's our own white label solution, okay? We got our name stamped right on it, Pay Compass, and you can get out there and you can start presenting it to all of your merchants today. So what does it do? How does it help merchants? Well, pretty much does a lot of the standard stuff. It captures transactional information. It can create customer databases. It can schedule recurring billing, send invoices, and your merchants have an opportunity to create customized hosted payment pages. Pretty straightforward. Scott, you know what? There's a lot of VTs that do that. Aha! But what if I told you it does a little bit more? And this is where I'm going to bring Jathan in right now. So Jathan, let's jump over here and let's talk about what makes PayVault a little bit different from some of these other solutions that are out in the marketplace. Right out of the gate, Jathan, this was something that you were super excited about when you and I were talking prior to this session. PayVault provides the ability to auto vault card information when a merchant creates a new customer entry. Could you mind just kind of expanding on that, Jathan?
Yeah, so the PayVault virtual terminal, when you're building a transaction there and you're actually creating a new customer, there's a couple checkboxes that you can enable that will automatically vault that customer information as its own, customer instance, but it also include the card information that you're entering on the virtual terminal. Now, this is a checkbox that you're selecting during the virtual terminal process. So it's not an automatic thing in the sense that you have no control over it. There are instances where someone may not want to vault that specific information or that individual customer information. And in that case, you don't have to check those boxes, but it does make accessing that data in the future much easier for businesses. And one thing that I really like on the PayVault side is regardless how the payments are coming through, whether they're associated with a customer or not, you can take any transaction that was processed through PayVault and create or link it to a customer and vault that card information. Some gateways, they limit the vaulted card information to only certain transaction types, such as through the virtual terminal, but maybe not through the invoicing side. PayVault allows you to vault any card that has been processed through the gateway.
Yeah, and that's one of the key points that we did want to make as far as a differentiator goes. The fact that some of those other VT environments where, they're kind of limited as far as the information that you can do. But Jathan, you're just saying this is easy as just checking the box and saying, yeah, you know what, this is something that I want to auto vault, keep that card on file. And you can pretty much do it with any transaction and gives the merchant the ability to decide which customers they want to do that for. Jathan, okay, so payment pages. Obviously, it's huge. A lot of merchants wind up using it. It's a good way to just kind of create a payment page, get it sent off to their customers to get their payments. But from what I'm understanding, they have the opportunity to customize the look, the feel. So this way it's branded with their particular companies, correct?
That's yeah, absolutely correct. So one of the huge highlights that I like with PayVault is how flexible the payment pages really are, with really the merchant being able to tailor the layout, the format in really any way that they would like, because they're essentially building the payment page completely either with a template or they can build a blank template, add all of the information that they want there, add their logo, change the coloring all within the dashboard itself. Some gateways are very limited on their payment links that they can generate. You're not really able to customize too much other than putting custom fields. PayVault goes the complete opposite way and really allows you the full flexibility you would need. I will say that if the merchant's not quite familiar with it, it can be a little bit of a learning curve, but once they grasp it, it really opens the doors to allowing them to do a much more wealth of flexibility on that actual design piece of the payment link itself.
Yeah, and Jathan, one of the things that you had shared with me too, as far as the ease of use goes, and I think that's probably going to be the biggest common theme with everything that we're going to show to all of you today as far as PayVault goes. But the level of simplicity, one of the jokes that you made when we were putting this session together, you had said that with some of these other payment gateways, you pretty much need like a computer science degree in order to create your templates and create that customized look and feel. And what you're saying, Jathan, is that a lot of ease of use, pretty much drag drop, not really that much of a learning curve to it. And most merchants can pick up on it fairly quickly, correct?
Yeah, and that's essentially what it is you're dragging and dropping different modules, say the billing descriptors that you're looking for, if you want to include shipping information, and you're just dragging that onto the page to add those modules. If you have a logo, you're basically dragging that onto the page to add a logo. Things like that that make it super flexible and easy, but also allows you the ability to generate a template and just release that payment link if you don't really need to go through and customize it with all the bells and whistles as well.
And Jathan, probably the biggest thing that I got excited about when you and I were putting this session together, the individualized fraud controls. Having worked, myself with a lot of different VT environments, a lot of different payment gateways, whenever you get into the settings and you want to set up fraud controls, usually what winds up happening is it becomes like a blanket setting, for lack of a better term. Meaning, if I'm the business owner, I go into settings, I go into the fraud controls, and if I check one box, what it does is it puts that fraud control in place across the board. But from what I'm understanding from you, with the way that we can do the fraud controls in here, is that we can individualize it based upon different criteria. Jathan, what would that criteria be as far as setting up the fraud controls goes?
Yeah, so essentially, you may have fraud controls where you want specific payment links to only be accessed by certain IP addresses. You want payment links to have certain fraud controls on their velocity to only allow X amount of customers to use that payment link within a certain period of time. But you don't necessarily want that same threshold to be applied to the virtual terminal or to be applied to invoice payments. And so you essentially can build individual fraud controls on really every payment type that you can generate within the PayVault atmosphere. So that includes the virtual terminal, invoicing as separate pieces, every payment page, every link you generate is its separate instance. Yes, you can build a universal fraud control that would affect every, payment type that's flowing through PayVault. But if you wanted to get extremely granular, you could essentially do this on any individual payment flow that you have, including the, API generations. A lot of our customers using PayVault are using the API integration to integrate with a website, and they may have very specific fraud controls they want enabled at that website, but they also may have a pay now button on their homepage that they don't want those same fraud controls enabled there. And that's where they'll go in and kind of fine tune those individual settings.
Yeah, one of the things that sticks out in my mind when you and I were talking about this, as far as the fraud controls go, you had made a comment that it helps to prevent card testing. And what I'm assuming that means is that someone is checking cards for balances to see if they can make purchases. Talk to me a little bit more about that, Jathan, or talk to our audience about that as far as the card testing goes.
So what we see a lot with virtual terminals, gateways where you've generated payment links is what's called card testing. Because essentially, with a payment link, you're opening up your business for any customer to process a payment there. But the problem is that you may run into what's essentially a nefarious actor running a list of cards through your payment link and essentially trying to confirm if the cards are valid. You may see a flat dollar amount for a penny, and then you see hundreds and hundreds of declines. The problem is those declines get treated as authorization attempts because they're hitting the processing platform side.
Yeah.
Or if your gateway is set up where you're being billed a transaction fee on every transaction attempt, regardless of approval or decline, that can be thousands and thousands of dollars if that card testing is not caught ahead of time. Um, so one of the benefits with PayVault is enabling the velocity controls. So you essentially can say, okay, at this payment link, I know that I'm typically getting around, 5 to 10 customers paying at my payment link a day, but I'm going to enable my velocity controls to prevent, or have a limit of 30 transactions within a couple hours. And then when that fraud is hit, when a card tester goes there and runs 30 cards, you get 30 declines. Every transaction after that is going to automatically be blocked at the gateway level. So it never actually hits the processing side. So those cards are never actually tested. You stop receiving declines. And I can tell you firsthand, catching a card tester at 30 cards versus 200,000 over the course of one day is a huge difference on transaction fees.
Yeah. And, for you, the audience, a lot of the stuff that Jathan and I are going to be sharing today, for the most part, it may seem very technical. Oh my gosh, you guys are throwing out a lot of techie talk. But what we're doing is we're giving you an opportunity to use these as discovery questions. So if you're dealing with a merchant that, has some sort of a VT environment or payment pages, and if they, and if you ask them fraud controls, or have you noticed that you've had people utilizing your specific pages or utilizing your website, doing bare minimum transactions, testing cards on your website. This is a good way to open the door and say, well, look, that does cost you money out of pocket when you have those people that are, doing that transaction for that 1 penny, and then, you wind up paying for it based upon what you're paying per month. What if I told you that there was a way that we could help to eliminate that by giving you our own PayCompass branded VT environment called PayVault, which would give them an opportunity to not only save money, but also keep some of those bad actors out. Jathan, let's keep it rolling, my man, because I know that you're going to be chomping at the bit here in a little bit to just kind of show what it looks like on the back end here. But let's talk about some more unique advantages. This is a great one. And this is an opportunity to just kind of expand everybody's horizons, because normally when we think, a virtual terminal environment, we're thinking service-related businesses, we're thinking B2B opportunities, but we have an opportunity to also utilize it as a POS system. Jason, what the heck are we talking about here? How can we use PayVault as a POS system?
Well, I mean, it's going to be somewhat limited in the sense of really
Some
what
of
you're
them
doing is
correct.
you're able to record transactions both at a card level as well as a cash level. So essentially, any payment that's flowing through your business can now be recorded within PayVault. The cash side was recently added, but essentially what it means is whether you're doing check processing, whether you're, taking cash payments from customers, you no longer have to record data from, in individual systems. You can now keep all of that reporting within PayVault and use that as your global virtual terminal, your global gateway where all your payments are flowing through, including, card present if you have a terminal set up that communicates with the virtual terminal essentially. And basically can manage the entire financial business of the, operation you're working with all within this one dashboard.
And Jathan, just to make sure that we are very clear with our audience here, when we talk about, you utilizing it similarly to a POS system. Friends, what we're not saying is run out there and go talk to every single restaurant on the planet and say, yeah, they'll do a complete menu build and you can do modifiers. Nope, 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 nope. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the ability to record transactions in different ways, much the same way that Jathan just said. Doing cash, card, ACH, check, and you can utilize payment terminals too. Jathan, I'm actually going to jump over to that third bullet where it says inventory and service setup. Now, one of the things that does make this unique is the fact that you can set up very basic inventory. So some of the examples that you had shared with me are, if a business is selling something simple, a coffee mug, a baseball hat, something along those lines, they can actually create the inventory with those items. Now, obviously, they're not going to use it like a full-blown POS system with a barcode scanner or anything like that, but they do have the ability to add inventory into stock. So for those scenarios where they are selling physical, tangible items, They're available to them as an inventory item. But similarly, Jathan, let's dive into this too. With this setting where you have the ability to add the inventory, within that section, you can, instead of using it for inventory, you can utilize it for your services. So let's say that I'm a landscaper and I offer maybe up to 5 different services to my customers. What I can do is I can go into that section and I can set up each individual service so that I can bill my customers accordingly, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And essentially, what that looks like is you're building products to add to either an invoice, and then essentially invoicing that out to your customer, or you're setting up, say, a recurring billing. As you mentioned, you may be a landscaper with monthly billing for services that you're providing, a monthly maintenance of a yard, or a business's, location. And really, that product side of things allows you to generate all of that within an invoice or within a recurring schedule and really show your customers exactly why you're billing them for what you're billing them for. We have many, many businesses that use PayVault specifically for that function so that they can input their products, kind of keep a stock count going within there, but still be invoicing out and still be able to track what that stock should look like as invoices are being paid, as invoices are being, and essentially as product is leaving the location.
So for full clarity for everybody, when it comes to inventory and services, pretty much it's for the invoicing purposes. So they can, quote unquote, attach the product to the invoice and bill their customer, or they can attach the service to the invoice so they can bill their customer accordingly. Level 2, level 3 support with no extra data entry required. Jathan, am I understanding correctly with some of the other VT environments? There's a little bit more data entry that's involved with the process. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so essentially the default level 2, level 3 is you're always having to input a lot more information as far as commodity codes, the sales tax, a lot of information to qualify for the level 2, level 3. We're able to actually input that data within some backend systems so that every transaction defaults to include the information we've put there so that every transaction the merchant's processing is essentially qualifying for level 2, level 3 optimization. It's a huge benefit for B2B transactions, business to business, and honestly, one of the biggest selling points for PayVault as it can drastically reduce the interchange cost of those specific card transactions.
Just another great feature added to it. Just to bring it all home at the very bottom, folks, dual pricing, surcharging, ACH support, also a huge piece of the PayVault system itself. But tell you what, Jathan, let's jump forward here a little bit more. Yep, we got a couple more unique advantages. I love this one, this top bullet. Partial payments on invoice. Sales agents, let me ask you a question. Just because I've seen the inquiries that come into the product side, and a lot of times, we read your emails and you're like, hey, I'm kind of looking for a system where I can split up some of those invoices. This is where PayVault is going to come in because, Jathan, I mean, a lot of these VT environments, some of these gateways, it's a one-trick pony. You generate an invoice, you send out an invoice. Now the customer has to pay that full invoice. But what I'm understanding here is that our merchants can set it up for partial payments, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So essentially, when you're generating that invoice, you can essentially say we want 25% down. That's what will get invoiced out. The customer will see the remaining balance. And then you'll actually see within the PayVault portal a partially paid status. You can then either pay it directly through the invoice if the customer wants to come in and pay that invoice directly with you. You can resend the invoice to get the remaining balance once the job is complete. All of that tracked within the customer database as well. So their entire history from the initial invoice being viewed, the initial invoice being partially paid, to the final invoice being fully paid is all tracked within the customer entry itself. So that's one of the other benefits. Yeah, yes, partially paid is awesome. I really like the fact that I can send an invoice and then I can get a viewed status knowing that the customer received that invoice, took a look at it, but hasn't quite made a payment there yet.
Yep. I would say probably my favorite use case for this when it comes to partial payments on an invoice. Friends, think about those catering businesses that you're talking to. How many times have you heard those catering businesses say, we usually take 50% up front, 50% due upon the day of the event? This is a great solution for them. So make sure that you guys are all thinking outside the box and make sure that all of you are thinking of some questions because we're going to break for a little bit of a Q&A in just a second here. Let's just keep going through this. Authorized invoices. Man, oh man. So, Jathan, as far as doing the authorized invoices go, we're helping to prevent fewer chargebacks. Not a lot of systems offer the ability to do an authorization first. Now, how is this helping our merchants to prevent those chargebacks, Jathan?
So the PayVault gateway allows you to do what's essentially a pre-auth. And you can actually send an invoice with that same functionality. It's not necessarily doing a complete sale to the customer. What it's really doing is it's pre-authing that transaction and queuing it within the dashboard for you to capture at a later date. We actually, on the backend side, can determine how long those pre-auths like stay active or before they'll expire. We typically default to 30 days as that's pretty in line with, say, TSIS's authorizations being expired. But what many businesses that we've worked with will do when they're using this functionality is they'll bill a customer as a pre-auth, and then they kind of let it sit there for a couple days as a pending charge. And then if the customer comes back and says, "Oh, you know what? I decided I don't want this product," they don't have to initiate a refund. The customer's not going to have to do a chargeback because I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but when you get a pending charge on your card, your bank will say, "Hey, you need to wait till this settles before you can initiate an actual chargeback. It's currently just pending." So you basically prevent the customer from being able to issue a chargeback. They call you, say, "Hey, I'm not happy with XYZ." And really, all you're doing is voiding that pre auth. Regardless of the settled sales that have been going in the meantime, that pre auth has just been hanging there waiting to be captured. It's not going to be captured in this instance. I can quickly void and everyone's happy.
Last but not least, has the ability to set it up with webhook integrations. For those of you that may not be familiar with it, this is something that can be set up on the back end. So regardless of whether, it's an office environment that wants to receive notification that the payment has been made, or let's say you're working with an environment where maybe they have a warehouse, and once the payment has been made, they want to trigger a notification off to the warehouse so that they can fulfill the order. This is another key piece to keep in mind with some of those merchants that you're talking to. Now, Jathan, advanced payment pages. All right. Obviously, I think I want to believe everybody has more than enough familiarity with payment pages and how they work. Generate a payment page, email it off to the customer. Customer can fulfill the payment and everything else. We talked about the ability to do an authorization, but let's talk about saving that customer and payment method, Jathan. What's happening here with these custom payment pages?
So this is a functionality that I've actually never seen at another gateway that I've used with merchants, and it really satisfied a very specific function that they were looking for. Essentially, the payment pages that we talked about, where you have all the flexibility of building those individual templates, you can actually enable a payment link to specifically only save the customer information and vault their card. They're not actually being charged for anything. They're just inputting their data to potentially be charged in the future for maybe a recurring
Done.
schedule. We saw this in a real life scenario when someone was moving from one gateway to PayVault. They didn't have the ability from their other gateway to migrate their existing vaulted cards or their customer information. So in lieu of saying, "Hey, email all your customers that you're going to have to bill them to get their card information," we were able to generate a payment link that only stored the customer information. In that business, all they had to do was put out kind of a blast email saying, "Hey, we're changing technology. Whenever you guys are ready, if you're set up for our monthly billing and you want that to continue, please input your customer information here and we'll be good to go from there." And then all they had to do once they had all the customers generated on their back end, they just then went in, set up the recurring billing the way it's supposed to be. And essentially, the customers don't really know any different, or they didn't at least have to make one payment knowing that I have to make this payment outside of my normal monthly billing because the merchant doesn't now have my information. So it really and it essentially gave this option to the customer in a way that they weren't expecting to have that functionality. They thought it was going to be a really big pain to get all that information from the customers, and it was actually a really easy transition for them.
Yeah, and I would say probably the biggest benefit of this too, for all of you agents out there that have worked at previous companies, regardless of whether you worked at Global or WorldPay or any of those other companies, we've seen your emails come through on our end from a solutioning standpoint saying, look, I set up this merchant with a former company. They have all of their data in there. Need to get them migrated over. Keep this in the back of your minds, especially when you're bringing over that book of business from that previous company that you worked at, because this could definitely be a time-saving solution. Last but not least, as far as the payment pages go, your merchants are always going to have the ability to create their own customized fields, not one size fits all. Make sure we don't give any of our merchants any cookie cutter solutions. Now, Jathan, let's talk about this one because this actually came about as a result of an email that went out from Justin this morning, today's daily bearing as far as what's new with PayVault. The ability to do the batch upload. So the batch upload feature allows merchants to process multiple transactions simultaneously using a secure template and a CSV file. Jathan, what would you say would be a use case for this, or who should our agents have in mind that could benefit from this?
So the batch upload piece is a unique function in that in my opinion, only specific merchants would use this. The ones that I've seen use it were very, very large internet service providers who had
There we go.
thousands and thousands of customers. And instead of needing, a virtual terminal where they're having to input all this data one at a time, they could essentially build one Excel file that has all of their customer vaulted information set up properly, the amounts that need to be billed, and they can click one button and charge 10,000 customers at once. So that's really what this batch upload is used for, kind of those global, huge, huge amount of transactions that all need to be processed in a very quick manner. In this scenario, they were processing it for like their monthly billing and needed the ability to do it in a large global scale.
So the key to this is to keep those merchants in mind that do all of their building in one fell swoop, and it gives them the ability to just kind of get them all documented, listed, however you want to phrase it, and then just at the click of a button, just get them all sent out in one fell swoop. Correct, Jathan? I think that was a correct. Did
Yeah,
I lose
that was
you?
a correct.
Okay, just checking. Whew. Doing one of these. I was like, please, internet, not today. Jathan, I'll tell you what, my man. Let's keep it going along here. Let's talk about some of the use cases. All right. So what I want to do is I want to throw this out to you, our audience, our sales agents. Who are some of these businesses that you should be talking to as far as PayVault are concerned? Well, usual suspects, service industries, landscapers, construction, towing companies, caterers. I talked about them previously. They're always looking to kind of split those invoices, maybe 50% upfront, 50% later. These are some of the businesses that you should be targeting. Property management companies. This one, I don't think gets enough attention. And the reason being, if you stop and you think about some of these, companies that rent out properties, or even, some of these landlords that are just collecting rent on a monthly basis. Nobody likes chasing after the paper check. Nobody does. I mean, come on, we're in 2025. So this is an opportunity to kind of dig in and talk to them. How are you billing your existing tenants? Oh, you're still waiting for that paper check every single month. Well, what if I told you we could streamline this? They can pay by card or they can pay via ACH. Start putting these on your radar a little bit more, friends, because I'll tell you what, it's very rare that I actually hear somebody saying, yeah, I'm talking to a property management company. I'm talking to a company that, does apartment rentals. Hunt them down. Start having conversations. I'm willing to bet a majority of them are probably still doing paper checks, and you might be the hero in the story. Last but not least, let's talk about some nonprofits. Maybe you're dealing with a business that has a nonprofit off on the side, and maybe they sell items every single year. Great. Okay. This is a good opportunity for them to sell those items, do it via invoice, pay for those items, want them done, get them taken care of. And for those businesses or those nonprofits that do recurring donations, this could also be a great option for them as well. And now, Jathan, my man, Do you have your demo account ready to go so we can show it to our friends here?
I do, sir.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And you know what? Now's a great time for us to kick it over to our audience. And we're going to start addressing any questions that you may have. I'm going to pull up the chat feature. Oh my gosh, you guys hit up the chat feature today. Good Lord. Let's see what we got for any questions that may have popped up. All right, so Jathan, I'm going to throw a few questions over to you, my friend. Okay, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. So Carol asked the question, just for comparison, when do you recommend MX Merchant versus PayVault? What would you say would be a good response to that as far as
So the M
differentiating? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the MX merchant side, you're basically looking at a little bit less functionality, a little bit less flexibility, but it's more from the cost perspective. So if you're just looking at a virtual terminal quick pay perspective, a applicable mid with MX Merchant's going to get that functionality for free. Once you start adding MX invoicing for the recurring option, obviously the invoicing option, or potentially the B2B optimization, you're then competing pretty closely on a pricing perspective. And then the one huge difference is MX Merchant's much more limited on how it can do essentially the surcharging or what would be considered like an advantage program where you're charging a fee for card processing. So, depending on those limitations, and that module is also an additional cost of the MX Merchant. If you're running into a business like that, you're probably going to have a better time implementing PayVault.
Hey, Jathan. Another question for you, my friend. When it comes to B2B and level two, level three transactions, is there additional information that we should gather from the merchant in order to qualify them?
Not necessarily. All of the information that we would be inputting, we can provide within just our own information that's provided on the MID itself. Whether it's the tax rate, we're going to pull that from a zip code. The commodity code is going to be specific to the type of business it is. So there's not really any additional information that needs to be given. We just need to set it up, and that module just needs to be, basically enabled.
Enabled. Excellent. All right, a couple of other questions here. John threw out the question, what type of a PIN pad does it use for card present? We're going to cover that in a little bit, but why don't we just pull back the curtain just in the interest of time, just to make sure that we do get these addressed. So we can utilize equipment for this, but Jathan, it's a very specific piece of equipment, correct, my friend?
That is correct. So the integrated card present terminals with PayVault would specifically be the Equinox devices that are on our hardware price sheet. They're network connected devices that then communicate upstream through the internet to the gateway. So they're not directly connected to a PC. They just need to be on a internet connection in general. What that means is you could have the virtual terminal pulled up in an office, and you could have that downstream device in a completely other building as long as it has internet access, and someone at the virtual terminal could input the transaction information such as the dollar amount needed, hit process to terminal, and that terminal will wake up and say insert card.
Second question, can vaulted cards be moved from Paytrace easily? Thoughts on that?
Well, so this is an interesting question because this is going to be more specific to how the pay trace side can actually export that info, and then what would be required on the pay vault side to import that info. Some gateways, you need a specific PHP file on the encryption side. There's a lot of different variables there. That specific question, we'd almost have to, work with multiple parties to confirm exactly what that would look like, with the very worst case scenario, implementing a hosted payment page through PayVault that's really just storing that information. And then customers can provide that kind of at their own leisure. And eventually, you're not bothering your customers, but you are gathering all that information over time for the customers that's necessary for.
All right, so if I'm understanding correctly, it's pretty much going to be like a case-by-case basis depending on how they were initially set up with Paytrace then, correct?
Yeah, it'd be more like a case by case basis on how the gateway is handling their
Okay,
encrypted vaulted cards, whether it's
got it.
Paytrace or NMI or any other gateway.
All right, two more questions, and then I'm going to let you take over the screen here, Jathan. Would this be a good fit for a countertop and in the field services for techs that are out there collecting payment? And is there a wireless terminal available?
Yes. So I want to say that PayVault is looking at having a completely like mobile solution. I don't believe
Okay.
that's been released yet. I do know they have mobile terminals that would still communicate with the gateway itself. Like you'd still need someone in the office implementing that virtual terminal. Um, but from a service counter perspective, many businesses will set up PayVault to have that customer facing device, but then they also have invoicing and all the other functionality they would need to process card payments.
All right. I actually lied to you, Jathan. I got two more questions, and then I promise you're taking over the screen. Uh, would it be possible for you to explain how the Shopify integration works that's listed at $25 per month?
The Shopify integration, I need to confirm if this was changed, but when we were initially releasing the Shopify integration, what it was, it's kind of funny, and it's kind of difficult to explain, but it's in layman's terms almost, it's like having a standalone virtual terminal for your Shopify website. And the reason why I say that, what it was, and may still be the case now, we haven't implemented it in a while, but you basically configure the Shopify website so that when a customer went there to pay, they would input all their information or put in the order, and then they go to click a like pay now button. That pay now button would close the order at Shopify, and a separate page would launch from PayVault where they would then input their actual customer information, like the card information and all that. So it's almost like a point of sale where you have a credit card button, you're closing that credit card, you have reporting at the point of sale saying you processed a credit card, but then you still need to go over to a standalone terminal and run that card at that separate device. But this was all within, an e-com setup, so it's really the customer having to manage that. That one caveat being technically Shopify records the payment as closed. So if the customer just moved on and didn't input their information, you missed that piece where you were capturing their actual payment side of things.
Yeah. So in short, it's not an instant gratification from a transactional process from the consumer side. Basically, what it is yes, I want this item, or yes, I want to make this payment, to which you're not staying within the same environment. It's opening up to another page, correct, Jathan?
Correct, exactly.
Okay. Last question, integration with QuickBooks.
So the integration with QuickBooks is essentially an integration with Biller Genie. So you're still using Biller Genie as that integration with QuickBooks, but the PayVault information is basically acting as that gateway to handle that integration. Uh, there's also, essentially downloading exportable reports that you're, I believe, able to import into QuickBooks and stuff like that. But the main QuickBooks integration, to my knowledge, is kind of utilizing Biller Genie with PayVault as that gateway.
All right. Jason, I'll tell you what, my man, I'm going to hand the reins over to you. I'm going to let you share your screen. Why don't you dive into some of those key features that our audience should be aware of? Audience, as always, let's get your questions out there. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, and you also are going to have the opportunity to come off mute. Any and all questions that you got, let's get them all answered. Let's get you out there selling prior to the end of April and before we kick off the month of May. Jathan, I see your screen is up. Take it away, my man.
I'm glad for that confirmation. I was just about to ask you.
And you
So
got it.
this is the first dashboard that your customer or your merchant would be logging into. All of this is just kind of quick data that they would be reviewing, basically transaction overviews, the invoices that have been sent, what's due, what's not, your recurring schedule, top customers, etc. So this is kind of a general dashboard from a virtual terminal perspective. This side here where you see to like listen this song link, you can basically input information where we could send out like a notice to the individual merchants and see that information there if we were releasing that type of information. On this left hand side is kind of your main movement between all of the various uh, PayVault gateway functionality essentially. So process transactions, obviously the virtual terminal here, this is where you're doing all of your normal transactions. You've got card ability, ACH ability. We typically integrate Paya through the or integrate Paya to the PayVault setup for that ACH check processing. And then terminal would be if you had a standalone device, or not standalone, sorry, an integrated device there that you're essentially processing, putting in that dollar amount, clicking that submit transaction button down here, and sending that data to the PIN pad for a customer to input their card. And then finally, like we talked about, that cash reporting, where you're essentially just processing a cash payment so that you, when you're pulling reporting, have all of the data financially that has flown through the gateway or that your employees have taken at the business. Now, when we go back to card here, one of the super, in my opinion, easy functionality here is just pulling up various customers. So if I come in here and search Jathan, I've got a couple instances here. I can select the Jathan Bennett customer. I've got a vaulted card right here. I can put in a dollar amount of 100. We actually have this configured where the surcharge is edible. You can make it where that surcharge is a definitive rate that the customer, or essentially the merchant here at the virtual terminal, wouldn't change. That would prevent employees from making a mistake on that side. And to be fully transparent, we can set up that fee to be billed in kind of like a non-cash adjustment way on any card that's processed. We can have it set up in a compliant surcharge way where only credit is billed, not signature debit or PIN debit. And then finally, we can implement a dual pricing perspective, which really just when you're processing a transaction shows two different rates for cash and card. And that includes the invoice side. So on their invoice, they would see your pricing is this if you pay by card, your pricing is this if you pay by cash. One of the nice things about the virtual terminal aspect of things is if you have the ability, if the business has the ability to take a card present transaction, when you send an invoice where they can pay online from the convenience of their home, that then allows you to essentially bill a convenience fee. Think about the movie theaters where you're skipping the line by buying a ticket online, but you're being charged a convenience fee. It's kind of that same thought process there. But essentially, you can pull up your customer entry right from here. I'm actually, to make this unique, I'm going to charge a random transaction so we can see what this looks like. We'll do a 3% surcharge. You can obviously email the customer receipt right there automatically. Custom fields I have enabled. So I'm just going to put in my customer ID as 12345. And then all of this information, such as the transaction details, invoice number, PO, billing, shipping information, you can actually hide hide these features here if they're not relevant to the business. And then from right there, you can also set up a recurring payment, build a schedule right from here, all from this transaction. Now I'm going to process this transaction. We'll do 455 process. I'm going to get an approval here because this is just a sandbox instance. It's not actually billing me. But the reason why I wanted to show all of that is now I can go to my customers. I can search for the customer. Here's that instance. Here's my history. Here's the transaction that I just processed. Now, from all of that as well, I can go back to my batch. I can come right here to the transaction that I processed. I can open up that transaction. I can add, print receipt. This transaction hasn't been actually settled yet. So I can come over here, I can void, or I can adjust the transaction. I'm actually going to adjust this for $200 with a 463 surcharge. Adjust that. That was now adjusted there. So I'm billing the customer this amount. And then I can also void that transaction right from here. So we voided that transaction, but Maybe in 2 days, the customer comes back and says, oh, you know what? Just recharge me. So I don't have to ask them for their card information. All I need to do is pull up the transaction within my reporting, click recharge, and I can just rebill them for what it was initially charged for. So a wealth of functionality right there within the reporting aspect of it. We talked about that authorized side. So this would essentially be that pre-auth functionality we were talking about. If I pre-auth a transaction, here, let's do this. 124. We're going to pre-auth this. And what it does is it doesn't actually settle a transaction when the auto close comes through. What happens is when I go to batches, it'll sit within this queued space. So it's just sitting there as an auth, waiting to be settled. And then once it finally, you decide you want to settle it and put it within the batch to be captured, you just come over here and capture. If you needed to void it 2, 3 days later, even if you were already settling other batches, you've queued this, it's not included in those settlements. I can always come over here and void that transaction.
Hey, Jathan, very quickly, probably another unique selling feature, and I know that this does come up a lot with some of the inquiries that we get. With some of these other gateways, VT environments, what winds up happening is there always winds up being an additional cost based upon per user. Now, with PayVault, merchants have the ability to purchase one license and set up multiple users, correct?
Absolutely. So from a user perspective, you're never paying an additional cost for adding additional users to the gateway. All you're really doing is coming over to control panel, user management, and building those individual users right from here. And as you can see here within our sandbox, we've got a wealth, we've got, over 40 different users within here. And essentially that allows you to add any sort of staff that needs to be interfacing within the gateway. What I like about it the most is we can go through, and as you see here, some of these users are master users, some of them aren't. We can essentially come in here, edit the user, and really fine tune exactly what they can do
Yep.
within the portal. So if really all this customer or all this, employee should be able to do is just process the transaction within the virtual terminal, but doesn't have access to voiding, doesn't have access to the reporting, you can fine tune all of that within this screen here.
All right. And I want to make sure we get that out there to our agents. So keep that in mind. I am aware that, with some of the other gateway environments, there's an additional cost. Now you're buying multiple licenses and everything else. This, you're buying one license, and you can tell your merchant, hey, look, you can set up multiple users and you can set permissions as far as what they can access. So if they just want their employees to process a transaction, great. But they don't want their employees to do refunds or anything like that, they can lock that down as well. Jathan, go ahead and continue on, my man.
Yeah, I think the next thing we'll jump into is kind of the invoicing side. We'll come back to batches in a minute. With the invoicing piece of all of this, I know that's going to be kind of heavily used with the PayVault environment. We talked a little bit about adding products here. You can see we've got test products, we've got a coffee mug. Essentially, what that looks like is you're putting in a product name, you're going through, you can add as much information as you want. The only really required is a name, what you're selling it for, and then if you want to include how much is in your inventory. Once you've built that product, you're essentially then coming through within an invoice perspective. As you can see, you can build a customer, you've got your invoice numbers, kind of standard for that invoice functionality. And then I can come here and I can search, um, or sorry, choose product, and then essentially search for that coffee mug that we talked about. Coffee mug right here. This is the unit cost. Here's the quantity that I'm adding to this invoice, and you'll see it listed here. You can input a tax rate. I actually worked with a business where we had to add the functionality to have a tax rate at like 3 decimal points, essentially. So there's a lot of functionality there on that point. Same thing with the unit cost. We can actually add an additional decimal point there. And then, add lines, add additional products, put in your notes, your terms. And then here within that, this invoice would be 100% required. All I'd have to do is edit this and say, I want to do 50%. 50% would be required to pay. And then we can send that off. I can change this to an authorized. So it's a pre-auth, not necessarily a full sale. And then basically that just gets sent off. Once it's been sent, it would be listed here. So you can actually see we've sent a couple test invoices to various agents to give them an idea of what this would look like. These were viewed. Some of these were essentially partially paid. This one was saved. It wasn't actually sent anywhere. And then you can see these ones were paid. Now, this one that was partially paid, if the customer came in and said, hey, I know I did my down payment, I'm ready to pay my final payment, all you'd have to do is just come here to the pay and then complete that payment right from here. Complete pay. If they called in and said, yeah, I'm ready for that final payment, you can request the final payment right from here. All of this managed within the invoicing tab. So it's easy to kind of read on what's outstanding and what's not. Obviously, we can look at the filter side of things to filter specific statuses, things like that. And then what I really like is all of this is available within the customer side as well. So this customer here, we're going to use Michael Hip as an example. If I go to customers and I search Michael, I can look at his invoicing and I can see right there that he's only viewed the 2 invoices we've sent to him. So it's really easy to go to a merchant or go to a customer and say, hey, we're still waiting for that payment. And if they say, oh, well, I never saw it, I missed that email, you kind of know within your side that that may not be the case, but let me resend this to you quickly. From there, we can touch base on the batch side of things. As I mentioned, all of the transactions within the batches would be listed here. You can drop this down, look at previous batches. These were all, test transactions that were technically settled. So in this environment, they were settled. I can't void these transactions, but I can quickly refund the transaction. I can quickly recharge the transaction. And I can look at all this from a date perspective and know exactly what transactions were settled within an individual batch. Now, that's kind of a function that people take for granted because if you're a business and you're doing reconciliation, yes, you have your reporting that shows, every transaction that was settled, but I also kind of want to just pull up a batch and know exactly what transactions were included in that batch itself. So it's nice to go through that within this. And as I said before, the queued side would be specific to pre-authorizations that are waiting to be settled. We'll just kind of keep going down the line here. Customers, this is going to be your customer database that we had already talked about. I'll use my entry as an example. So we've got Jathan here, wallet, full info of what you would want to include. You can edit this. You can merge it with another customer entry. So I've technically got 2 here. I could essentially merge these. That functionality would be useful if the kind of person on file is a husband, the wife comes in to make a payment. It technically builds 2 separate customer entries, but you want to link those so that you keep all the payments and the wallets and all that within one instance. That's what that merge functionality would allow for you. And essentially you've got your wallet here where, you may have a customer that calls in that says, hey, just keep my card on file. That's what this add button would do for you. You can just input the data right there, store that card information. And then history would be any transaction processed to this customer. Essentially you can pull up that transaction right from here. And then I can open up that transaction. I can refund that transaction. I can, as we've mentioned, recharge or print receipts. So that piece is really nice, and that you have the full history of this customer as long as you're linking them. And even if you didn't link them, as I've mentioned, I can always go back to, say, my reporting, and we'll look at like this Sally sales here. So I can always, if this wasn't linked to a customer already, there would be a link to customer here. and I can just click that and associate it with that customer directly. So I don't have to then worry about my employees missing a transaction, missing putting in that customer information, and now I have kind of staggered payments everywhere. This allows you to still link what needs to be linked from an individual transaction basis. From the customer side, you kind of continue to have that same reporting we talked about. Invoices would be listed here. Same thing with the recurring side would be listed here. Really, the full data of customers is all available and really easy to navigate between the system, interfacing with the batch reporting and just standard reporting in general. Recurring side, super easy to set up. Recurring will really just kind of show you this is what's currently active, this is what's not active. Setting up that recurring can be done via invoicing or the process transaction under recurring payment. But really, recurring just lets you quickly see what do I have out there, what's recurring and what's not. And then reporting is really just transaction reporting. The thing I love about this piece itself, though, is you can really fine tune what you're showing, what data is important to you. So right now, I have 13 columns that are kind of default here. Auth, description, if that's necessary. But I can open this up and you can see there's many, many different columns and different things I can add to this report if it's necessary to my business, even the custom fields that I've enabled previously. So if I enable that there, those transactions that I did earlier where I was just throwing some data in, you can now see that that customer ID is included here on this report that can be downloaded to an Excel file, emailed or printed, and then I can essentially save this view as a default. So every time I come, I can see exactly what I'm looking for. Many businesses are specific on, well, we have this custom field because that interfaces with another piece of software we're using. But I can't get that information from a report, so it makes it difficult to line up transaction in PayVault to a transaction in a separate system. This would allow you to really fine tune what your accounting team is seeing and making sure they have all the correct information that they need to reconcile those payments. And then scheduling would be kind of that recurring scheduling. You can see the reporting within what recurring billing you have set up. We talked a little bit about the, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, friend.
I was going to say, we talked a little bit about the payment side, the payment pages here. These are essentially links that you're generating. In my opinion, if you're generating a link, it's for something that's going to be used more than once. If I'm sending the like a direct link to a customer, I'm using the invoice side here because I can SMS that invoice, I can email that invoice. They're going to get a link to pay that transaction. But on the payment page side, if I'm generating a link that many different customers are going to use, that's the link I'm going to generate. It'll be listed right here. And as far as editing it, I actually built this link quickly this morning while we were all sitting here talking on this meeting. I'll delete that quickly and kind of go through how easy it is to generate a page with just normal functionality, and then really highlight what that means if you wanted to get crazy with it. So we've got Toolbox Tuesday. I'm generating the URL. Some payment link pages don't allow you to confirm or really build the URL that you want your customers to see. And then I'm going to choose, as we mentioned, we got 3 options. This one, I'll just do a charge. I can choose if it's going to be a light or dark theme, which essentially changes the backgrounds here. I'm going to do light. And these are the templates that come with that payment page. So you've got a vertical, a horizontal, and then you've just got a blank where you can just build this completely from scratch. I like the vertical side, so I'm just going to save that, generate that page. And then this is the generated page that I created within a click of a button. I can essentially download that URL, input it, embed it on a website, and this page would be ready to accept payments. If you wanted to then edit it, that's where you're using some of the functionality here on the left-hand side, such as adding images, adding dividers to kind of break things up. you can actually come here and edit some of this functionality, or the what this says here, what the colors are, what the fonts are, all of that within this page here, to the point where I can even select this surcharge, and you can see it's got this surcharge enabled. It's defaulted on the backend side, and you can actually edit this information when it's not hard coded on the backend side by us. And you can change this dollar amount to where they have to charge $100. They don't get to choose what they charge. All this functionality just built within this page here. And then once you're complete with your edits, you're essentially saving and exiting, um, and then taking that page and embedding it where it needs to go. Some of the users on this call may have saw you can do credit, check, Google Pay, and Apple Pay. Google Pay and Apple Pay would be specific to the device that's utilizing the payment link, but that functionality is here. And that's basically how easy it is to generate a default template, and really how functional it is if you wanted to get wild and crazy with it. We have had a couple instances where a agent was working with kind of a picky merchant. They didn't like MX Merchant because of the limitations there. They didn't like Swipe Simple because of the limitations there. PayVault allowed them to do the functionality they needed, and had the flexibility from a payment page that they were looking for. Fraud controls. This is where we talked about before. Every single instance of a payment is built within this page. If you guys can tell here, these Toolbox Tuesdays are actually the payment links that I just generated. So I can put in fine-tune specific fraud control modules within that individual payment page, or I can do it from a universal standpoint and essentially control the entire PayVault instance from one module. So it gives you the flexibility, but it doesn't force you into, okay, I have to repeat this step 40 different times because I have 40 different ways of making payments. So this is kind of that velocity control we talked about. I know that within 30 minutes, I'm only going to have a max of 500 transactions. Anything after that is going to be what I would consider card testing, and I want the gateway to block that information. And then finally, your control panel is going to be where you're actually inputting and customizing various fields of the PayVault setup.
Jathan, this is why I asked you to run the demo today, because there's no way in heck I could have done what you just did, my man. So, Jathan, tell you what, my friend, we're gonna get ready to wrap up here, but I did get another question that popped up into the chat. PayVault, does it have the ability to handle multiple MIDs?
Um, Not necessarily. So this gateway is going to be specifically set up for one individual mid. The multi-mid functionality, really the only additional mid you can put there is in very unique cases where someone has a separate Amex mid. We've never really had to implement that, but from a general standpoint, you're only keeping this specific to one mid instance.
Got it. All right. As we get ready to wrap up, now's a great time to take more questions from you, friends. So if you would like, you can put your questions into the chat, or if you like, just cover it off mute. We'd love to hear your voice. Let's get your questions out there, and then we'll wrap it up and call it a day, and we'll see each other again next week. But let's open it up for questions. Checking the chat. I did not see any additional questions. Looks like we got an attaboy. Ooh, there we go. All right, going once, going twice, going three times.
I have a
Pinky,
question.
Oh,
yes.
look at that. They all came out of the woodwork. I knew it. I knew it. Come on, get those questions out there. What you got? Somebody that came off mute. Who was it? I saw you.
Arquisha did. I don't know if he
Aquisha.
wants to go first. I
You're
put in
you're
the
going
chat.
first.
I put in the chat, and I want to make sure I didn't miss it. What terminals work outside of the PayVault? I don't think we actually, for card present.
Hey, Arquisha, the card present devices are all going to be the Equinox devices listed in our hardware pricing sheet.
Equinox. Okay,
Correct.
perfect.
Also, my question, Jaden, was for um, property management for business owners. Um, is there like a set amount that we could charge them so that, when let's say somebody's paying their rent through Zelle or sending a check, um, um, but they don't have something like this for them to pay with their card or, send an e-check. But they are going to charge the renter the 3% or the 3.5%. That's going to, you know, increase that rent volume or total. Is there a way that it's only one set transaction that we could charge those property management companies?
Um, I guess I'm trying to understand the question. So are you saying the property management company is going to be charging like their customers and they only want to charge them a flat rate fee, like they're determining what rate that fee would be to them? Or are you talking more from
Well, yeah,
we're
like if we
charging,
do, if
go ahead.
if they are charging their tenants, if they pay, if they send them this payment link to their email or to their phone number right through MSM. If they said, hey, your rent is due on the first and the rent is, let's say, 2,000, but in there it's going to be the 3% or 3.5% surcharge or cash discounting or however that goes. Is there a way where they don't do that to their tenants, but they charge the property manager company or owner? We charge them a set amount a month.
So the mid pricing itself would be kind of outside of the PayVault side. So if you're charging the property manager a flat rate on the mid side, then that would just be how that actual merchant account is set up. And
Okay.
then they're charging their customers then through PayVault, even if they're including that percentage in their price and just forwarding that $1 amount to the customer. What happens as far as the mid discount rate, that flat rate, that's all dependent on the merchant account, not necessarily the PayVault setup, if I'm understanding the question properly.
Um, I think what I'm trying to say is, so because um what's his name? Scott, he brought up a good point about property management company that they're overlooked. And I'm like, how are we going to tackle this industry when there is a lot of property management out there that are using some sort of payment reminder, even dental offices? But how are they, if they don't want to pay the rates, right, and they want to pass those rates on to their tenants, how would that impact or affect that? Or is there another way?
I would I would say that would probably be more of a case by case basis. So in that instance, and this is just me talking, I'm not a sales leader. By no means am I a sales leader. But in those instances, the way that I would price those deals is just doing it on a flat rate, not worrying about surcharging or cash discounting or anything like that. Because to your point, there's no landlord out there, or there's no property management company that says, "Hey, if you pay with a credit card, you're going to pay another 3%." You know what I mean? It's like almost like it would almost like be a bait and switch based upon the agreement that the renter signed. So I would say, just in my opinion, and once again, not a sales leader, just a trainer, I would say set it up so that it's on a flat rate, so that they don't have to worry about muddying the water with passing on the cost to the people that are renting from them. Conversely, conversely if the rental company wanted to give a heads up to all of their renters, starting January 1st, if you pay your rent with a credit card, you will incur a 3% fee. I mean, that's something that I would think the property management company would want to work out with their own client base. Just a
Okay.
thought.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
You
Scott.
got it. No problem. Whew.
Thank you, Jaden. Great presentation, by the way. Appreciate it.
I
Yeah, and
appreciate
look
it,
at
man,
that.
for sure.
We are going to wrap it up, friends. We went a little bit long, but you know what? Your questions were great. We love seeing you on these calls. At the beginning of this call, he was so humble and he said, normally I work on the support side. Normally I don't work with the sales. But you know what? I think he did a great job working with sales today. Ladies and gentlemen, do me a favor. Give some love to Jathan Bennett for joining us here today. Jathan, thank you for helping me to put this together. And thank you for taking the lead on this, my man. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to help for sure.
Excellent. And with that said, friends, we are going to get ready to wrap up here and going to wish you the best. Next time I'm going to see you again, it's going to be in the month of May, which is next week. And at that point in time, we're going to be doing a coffee with closers. That's coming up next week on Tuesday, May 6th. Tomorrow, I'm sending out all the invites for the month of May. Once again, if you don't see an invite filling your calendar for a Tuesday, just reach out to us, sales@paycompass.com. More than happy to get those invites sent over to you. Until we meet again next week on Tuesday, make it a great week. Close out the month of April strong, and look forward to seeing you again on Coffee with Closers next week on Tuesday. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.